Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's call. This week, we're going to be talking about the athlete training environment. We're going to be discussing who we train with, whether we train just by ourselves, with a team, with a specific person, or with just our coach. The differences between the environment in which we train it at. And we're also going to talk about the external factors that go alongside the environment. So, our location, the aesthetics of the training gym, and also the physical kit that we're training with, and whether that makes much or, if any, impact to our training and our overall progress. I'd like to um, hear from everyone about your different experiences of your different training environments. And this doesn't necessarily have to be just powerlifting specific. You may have played or been part of different sports where you had a specific training environment that you really excelled at. So I'd really like to hear from all of you about your different experiences in powerlifting and also in other sports as well. Um, so I think it would only be right to start with you, Ryan, as you seem to have a very unique perspective on your specific training environment that I'd like to pick at straight away because of all of the coaches who provided the answers about their athlete training environment, yours was the unique one that stuck out to me. So can you just explain to everyone what is your ideal training environment that I'm presuming that's what you're currently training at now. And what's been your favorite training environment of your career?
Yeah, so I am a bit of a loner. uh, I train by myself. I train in my garage. I don't like training around people. And I I don't mean that in like a cruel way, but I've been in the gym training, not just powerlifting, not just bodybuilding, but I have been within a gym facility since I was 6 or 7 years old. That's when I first started martial arts. That's quite you train with people, but you're training for yourself as well. Very, very similar to powerlifting. So I think being within that environment all my life, I'm now in a position where I don't want to be around people when I train. Just it's one of those things. I don't want to talk to people when I'm training. Like that is my only alone time that I get, be it because my whole life revolves around being in a gym, being a PT, being a coach, being an online coach. And obviously from what my partner does and my all my close friends, everything is about lifting, and everyone wants to talk about themselves, and I don't really talk about myself a lot, but I like to isolate myself. It's like, this is my time. I don't want to be talking to anyone. I don't want to be socializing. And I found for me recently that like that's been the best route. Whenever I've trained in the gym, I've always isolated myself to myself. April found out quite quickly, my other half, that I don't like to be spoken to a lot when I train. So she doesn't. She's very, very supportive in that. Hence why I moved into a garage gym. I don't have the opportunity to talk to people and for people to talk to me. And I feel like I can solely focus on the task at hand, and I could give my 100% energy into whatever I've got in front of me.
Amazing. I think you also have a slightly similar perspective of your athlete training environment as well. Although something I absolutely agree with here is that you like to surround yourself with fellow serious athletes. Are you happy just to elaborate on this a little bit more, please?
Yeah, so bouncing back off of Ryan, very similar in terms of like my life is in the gym. I also do PT, I coach and all that stuff. So when I train, I do prefer to be alone. But if there are people there, I do love that there are people that have like big aspirations. They are world level lifters, they're national level lifters. They want to win worlds, win nationals. So they take their training very seriously. So at the gym, we're talking, but it's very quick. Like, hey, how are you doing? what do you have today? And then straight to work. Headphones are in and we're barely talking to each other. But it's also very supportive in a way of like, we're not ignoring each other. Like once we get to top sets, we are watching each other's sets and like kind of cheering each other on. So that's been super encouraging in my opinion. But the only downfall is that the gym I train at is a bodybuilding focused gym. So they have very little comp equipment. There's, I think, 1 power bar, 1 illegal bar, and then limited kilos and 2 combo racks. So when there's more than 3 powerlifters there, it gets tough to try to share and try to get your work done.
Do you think there's any other drawbacks to surrounding yourself with such strong competitive athletes? Do you ever feel, for instance, if you weren't feeling 100%, that you may be judged by them, or you may feel slightly isolated in that type of environment if they were to say, for instance, that they wanted to train or had to train because they were at like a higher level, for example?
Yeah, I think the biggest downfall for me is I get into the trap of comparing myself to them, because that's also where I want to end up. I want to be at the national level. And when I see those national level lifters doing what they're doing, like it's motivating, but also I run into that trap of comparing myself to them. Because I've been doing this for 7 years and some have only been doing it for 2 to 3 years. So I run into that trap like, okay, why am I not there yet? And they are. So that's the biggest downfall. But other than that, it's usually pretty motivating.
So to flip this completely on its head, Brandon, I know you have a completely different opinion and perspective on your specific and training environment. Can you elaborate on that a little bit further for me, please?
So I really enjoy training in with other people. It just depends. I'm quite picky about it. And I think that a lot more people can and should be this way. Of like, you will at some point perform at a competition where you will be forced to be around people. And so very much speaking to like the same values and ethos that I've talked about on previous calls, where we were talking about like psychology or like pre-lift routines, particularly when bringing that into competition day. I do like to have people around every now and then in training, depending on what it is. Like it's so at the minute I'm in the middle of prep, and something that I find really, really helpful is having people from basically a mixed bag around me whenever I'm in my last heavies week. So usually that's coming from people who are like hyper supportive, or perhaps it's people that I don't know that well. People from like different perspectives, basically. Other athletes, other coaches, whatever. Because it's quite a performative thing, in my opinion. And you definitely can get into that and lean into that a little bit more. Now, like granted, I've done 10 years of music theatre, so that is definitely where my bias is coming from as far as that's concerned. But there are instances where I do enjoy like having that crowd and being able to pull on that crowd for, like, as I say, performative or like motivational reasons. I will say the flip side of that for me is that the 95% of the work that is done that is not last heavies is done with my wife and only my wife. And that's about it. Like, I just want a spotter there to make sure that I don't die, and that's fine.
Amazing. Adam, can you share your perspective of your training environment, please?
So I'm in a similar situation, although to Ryan. I primarily train at home. Like, I think this year I've been to a public gym once. There's lots to it, and I think training alone suits me. However, there are markers that at times can get overwhelming or hold you back in terms of doubt. And what Brandon touched upon is he likes to train with his wife because he likes having that spotter there. When you're training at home alone, no one can hear you. Like, shit can hit the fan in terms of confidence sometimes, especially with the squat, like walking out with a few other kilos on your back. taking a weight you've never done before. So that's one of the tricky elements. And in that respect, I think I'd quite like I can't say for sure, I think I'd quite like every now and then to experience a group training session with like-minded individuals, but with the approach of what Kulin said, is keeping conversation minimal. I would say I'm quite a closed book, but I think as powerlifters, we can kind of gauge the respect for one another. We know how to load a bar for each other and stuff like that. So it's that general respect that I think you don't need to have those conversations. You can keep them until after, and we understand that. But in the grand scheme of things, I would prefer to train alone just because of the stimulus of going to a public gym. So there's a lot of people, a lot of sounds. This is quite important to me. Like, I quite like a neutral atmosphere where I can focus on what I'm doing. And escape noise in general, like not just literally, but background noise and stuff like that. So I think that's the beneficial side to it. And I think there's a lot of professional athletes that do it this way, like training alone. Chris Bumstead, for example, he trained alone in his gym. But then on the flip side is what I raised into the WhatsApp group is American footballers. They share a massive environment when they're doing their gym sessions. You literally have 50 people crowding around a squat rack, hyping the shit, like, oh my God, demonetize that, but hyping them up. So I think it's really what fits that person and what's unique to them.
Have you had? Oh, yeah. Go on. Come. What were you going to say?
I was going to say I wanted to add to that. So I did play American football growing up, and that is my mindset has changed. When I was younger, that was very much my type of environment, being around the guys and cheering each other on. But now it's been completely flipped. So I just want to add that Adam's completely correct.
Yeah. So this actually leads really nicely onto our kind of ideal training environments. But I don't want to leave you out, Alice. Do you want to share what your preferred athlete training environment is?
Yeah, so my preferred training environment has changed throughout my time. I had to stop. I really liked training at work because I liked being at work, and then it got to a point where I really struggled to switch off from work. So I ended up training at a different gym after work, and I now quite like having a combination of them both. So I used to just train at work, and then I went straight the other way and went the other way to just training at Dream with friends, and it was a busier gym and I quite liked it. But then when it's busy, you might be waiting for kit, and if you've had a long day, then that gets a bit annoying. So now I'm doing a combination of like training at work because I am able to switch off a bit better now, and training in a busier environment when time allows it. So I train with a mixture of like kind of on my own, but I quite like it when there's other people in the gym and I can see that other people are working hard, but they're doing their own thing. I don't actually know who they are. I don't like training in a completely empty space. So like how Adam and Ryan train, I would literally sit on my phone for hours. I think I am a lazy person. I would probably take hours to do my session and probably wouldn't work that hard. So I quite like being around people. I do like a mixture of training with people I know who I will have small conversations with, but also happy to train on my own as long as there are other people there just around.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I know exactly how you feel. I've kind of been, not by choice, but forced into my own kind of training environment because that's where the kit is. But I'm usually the only one in there because it's just the power bar, the comp plates and the rack. So I kind of get forced into my own training environment. But if I don't have those people kind of around me, holding me accountable, you do sometimes get lost on choosing a song, or if you scrolling through your program for hours. And I'm the same. I sometimes do get stuck on my phone for a little bit. I think for me personally, the best training environment that I've ever experienced is training with like-minded individuals that completely understand what it is that you're doing. I think our DBD training days have been some of the best training that I've done personally. And I don't think that's just because, obviously, like Callum's been there, my coach has been there. I've wanted to make sure that he's seen quality work and a good, strong output, and that I'm acting as I'm supposed to, and I'm setting my own standard that everyone else that's there will see. But also because you are surrounded by those people that are encouraging you and bringing you up to that same standard that we all kind of live by. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the training environment is like at the new dedicated gym. This wasn't actually intentional, that the athlete training environment conversation came straight after the gym announcement, but I think it'll be really interesting, I think, for all of us to experience what it's like to train there, because for Adam and Ryan, this could potentially push you completely out of your comfort zone, because it is essentially going to be a public gym. And I'm not sure if Callum is putting a contract in one room potentially, so you've got the option to train by yourself. But that might be something that's worth putting forward as maybe a proposal, if he's open to proposals, because then everyone will kind of get what the kind of environment that they want. But yeah, that's just an idea. So talking about ideal training environments, so first of all, I just want to touch on my favorite training environment that I've experienced as an athlete. This goes all the way back to when I was a high board diver and I was training as a team, doing an individual sport, but with a team of like-minded athletes that we were relatively the same age, but we were all divers. I don't remember ever having a session where I didn't want to go, I didn't want to turn up, because at the time I was going to do something that I loved with a group of my friends, which we worked hard and we had the hard sessions and we had really good coaches that, you know, pushed us every session. But I don't remember looking back and actually thinking that it was like super serious hard work. And I definitely didn't have the same athlete mentality that I do now and take the sport as seriously that I do to powerlifting. But I remember that environment being so much fun because I was there with all my friends and it was enjoyable. And I think especially since training alone, I dread my sessions a little bit more now, because I know that I'm going to spend an hour and a half to 2 hours in a room by myself, holding myself accountable, setting that standard and doing the hard work without really being accountable to anyone else, because no one else is there witnessing it, which is a massive flip on its head. So from any kind of exploring experience that you've had, what have been your ideal training environments that you have loved the most from any sport, even if it's like team sport or individual sport? And Ryan, no, you cannot say it is you just training in the gym by yourself, because give me a different example of you training by yourself.
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button. I think the biggest difference is when I used to do martial arts, I said it was more of an individual thing, but you're very much right, Lucy, when you mentioned about your swimming, you're with your friends, you're training with each other. I do think the biggest difference is the fact that when you're going to those types of environments, even like American football, everyone's got the same thing. Everyone's got the same program. Everyone's got the same written up class thing for the day, very much like CrossFit. You go in, it's a set class, everyone does the same thing, everyone's on the same wavelength. I think if I was to go back to like fun, those are the days that training was the most enjoyable, because I was around that environment. What I like now, and I'm gonna say it, I do prefer being by myself, with the simple fact of I've tried to train with other people, and within the environment that I'm in Gloucester right now, all the people around me are all my clients. I don't have a lot of people around me that I could train with that aren't my client, that are powerlifters around this area. And that makes things very difficult for me. I cannot switch off. I've tried it, and I cannot switch off my coaching mind when I've got several people around me, even if they're not talking to me, I can switch off from that coaching mindset. So I physically can't say that I've had a well thought session when I've trained with people. And this is where this sort of like loner mentality comes from, because I feel like I can concentrate the most. I can put my phone away. I can train by myself. Regardless of gym, I can put headphones in and I can just ignore everyone. It's just easier to have a home gym. So yeah, that's where I'm at with that. I don't think I've had the exposure to other athletes that aren't a client that can push me, but no, not to disturb me. So
have you struggled going from a nice, calming loner environment into the competition scene then, where it's obviously it's loud, it's chaos, there's so many people around, everyone's sharing the kit? Do you struggle with the kind of the heavy swap between the two?
No. I think Welsh Nationals, Welsh Championships, whatever it's called, was the very first time I had a handler. That was last year. And I've done loads of comps by myself. That was the first one I've had a handler, and that was Beck. So you can imagine the type of handling that I got. He'd give me a grunt, he'd tell me what number I've got, and then he'd leave me to it. And I felt like I could have done that for all intents and purposes by myself. I've done every other comp by myself. I don't have this fear going into comps. And I'm not too sure if that's just because I've done competitions all my life. Like when I used to do martial arts, I used to do competitions all the time. So when I transitioned to powerlifting, it was just like, right, okay, this is another competition. It's just a different stage. There's going to be eyes on me, but I don't really focus on them. In martial arts, you focus on the opponent in front of you. In competition, I focus on the ref, the center ref, and that's it. Training during travel. Is that go on, Brandon?
I was just gonna say, because you and I are quite similar in that aspect of like, I don't like training at the same time as my athletes. And I've just fully outed myself there, but like I actually don't like training at the same time as my athletes because I find it really hard to switch off, as you're saying, and be an athlete for a couple hours. And instead, like usually I'll have questions or I'll get like in-person RPE checks on stuff that they've recorded, and I'm like, hey, I'm about to hit my top set. So I'll look at that after I hit my top set and then we'll talk about it. So it's usually, that's why, like, for me, it's very much I like to distance myself. But it has been during travel that I've found the reason why I like crowds. And it's because none of them are my athletes. So, like, we would train. Kat, my wife, is obviously from San Diego, California. We train at a gym called West Coast Elite out there. Massive shout out to those guys because they're awesome. And Wes, the owner. So we went out there, and at the time, whom you might know, this guy, Dominic Fuqua, he just went from USAPL Pro to IPF. And he's putting up totals like similar to Kaiko, similar to Aiden, but because he's so new in the IPF scene, he's really like recent. He's something like 570 dots. Like he's really very, very, very good lifter. And being in with him and training with him was the sickest thing I think that's single-handedly ever happened to me. Because it felt like being with someone. I'm like, bear in mind, I didn't really know this person based off of like media notoriety at the time prior, but like training him with him, just meeting him as an individual, like who he was, and the standard and the way that he carried himself. Like, excuse me for the brain rot terminology, but like the aura that that 500 plus dot lifters have is real, like 100%. And so I think like I'd be curious to see, Ryan, if you travel around and train in those gyms and meet some of those people while you're traveling, would that affect things differently? Because is it that you don't like crowds and that's why you like being a loner? Or is it that you don't like training with your athletes and that's why you like being a loner? Because that side I relate to. But if my athletes aren't in that gym and don't train at that gym, I will absolutely adore training in with anyone that's there.
I think there's another part to this as well. And I don't like to admit this. I've got a massive fucking ego. So if I have eyes on me and I am one of the stronger people in the room, I will act on that. And I don't like that. I don't like it because it's like, no, because I'm teetering off the program. I'm teetering off just to try, and I am trying to show off. I don't know what it is about it. I don't know if it's I need to show up. I need to do something, but I have got a big ego. Shutting myself off in that sense, where I do sometimes train in the gym that I work at, very much like Alice, when there's no one there. Okay, there's no eyes on me. I got nothing to prove. I don't know why I don't know why I think that I've got something to prove anyway. I don't. But I got that mindset. So I'm like, if I was in that environment, I would be interested to see how I would act, how I would respond.
Amazing. Does anyone have any other like preferred athlete training environments that they've experienced in their life that they'd like to share?
I was gonna say, I think with me there's a discrepancy between fun but what works better. Because I think looking back at my history within sport, from football, cricket, jumping, bowling, I know it's huge in America, but it's not so much here. But I've done such an array of sports, and I think the most fun times have been in group or team events. For example, doing Temping Bowling Nationals, you've got 48, 60 lanes of just 5 people per lane, and it's quite an epic environment. And then to the other side of that, playing football on Wembley pitch against Newcastle one time when I was much littler, not capable of football now, but just getting the minivan all the way up to there with the whole squad, and that's fun. But then on the tangent to that, I think what works best for me though is being hyper focused, and to have that is in a quiet environment now. So I used to train with music, but that takes away the focus. So now typically I'll train in dead silence, but on my own, so I can really focus on what I need to do. I do find that when I go to like a public gym, like Ryan said, I think you get caught up with showing or living up to the standard. I think that's one of the biggest things. What I think Ryan's trying to explain is living up to the standard, showing what the standard is and what you should hold yourself to the standard. I think that's why a lot of us perhaps step up in a public gym, whereas in like a environment where you're on yourself, you're more likely to let things slip and people not see. Whereas if you're in a public gym, if you slip up, it shows you're not about the standard and it's not a good look to others. Although slipping up is fine, we want to hold ourselves accountable and hold us to that standard to sort of, I wouldn't say entice, but motivate people to do what we do because we love what we do. So I think there's a discrepancy between fun environments for me, but what compared to what is optimal for me for performance.
I wanted to add on that. I think that part of it too is that a lot of people don't treat powerlifting like a sport. So when we go to team sports, our main goal is to beat the opponent that's coming up on the schedule. And we all have the same goal. And I think that's why, because I'm thinking about it, I think training back then was also a lot more fun for me because we had the same goal of like, okay, this team is next on our schedule. Our main goal now is to prepare to beat them. So I think that's why it's harder for me now to train with other people, because some people don't train and treat like powerlifting as a sport, whereas I do, and it's a little different.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Like in the military, if all of the girls are training together, like in the warm-up room, we're actually all competing together because all of our totals, like no one gets put into a weight and age category. It's all just overall IPF points. So yeah, I kind of completely agree with that. Although we're all friends and we're all colleagues, we are kind of technically all competing against each other. And then you move on from that and you get the inter-services team, which is the best in the RAF that then compete against the Army and the Navy. So then once your opponents are now your teammates, and then you're competing against a different service, which you then want to be competitive against them. But then again, moving on from that, you've got the UCAF team, which is the UK Armed Forces team, which is the RAF, the Army, and the Navy, who you've just competed against. But the best of each service then got put into a group, which you then become a team, and then go and compete against another country's federation. So it's all these people that were once your kind of opponents now all of a sudden become your teammates. So it's quite difficult to kind of distinguish between friends and not, of course, enemies, but competitors. So yeah, that's a very interesting one. I also do agree with.
That is an interesting point of enemies versus or being your competitor, but you're actually friends outside of it. And there's loads of examples within sport. Within strongman, for example, you've got top competitors that they're fiercely competitive. They put everything into the sport, and they're friends outside. So, for example, one rivalry was Eddie Hall and Brian Shaw. Now they're comical on YouTube. Like, I watch them all the time. I love the content they do, just bantering with each other. But they have that mutual respect and understanding of what goes into it and what they're trying to achieve. So come competition day, they're not asses to each other. Like, they're giving each respect, but they give a bit of banter, like obviously pushing the shove here and there to ultimately win. But after, shake hand, like congratulations. Or for example, Eddie Hall and Thor, they were friends, but now they just parted ways and they had a fight together. But even at the end of the fight, even being like the utmost enemies, shook hands, congratulated each other, and moved on. So I think it comes down to that mutual respect you have for one another, even if they're an enemy or not, or opponent.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, at the end of the day, you share a very similar mindset, athlete mentality, because at the end of the day, you both enjoy the sport in which you're playing. And that's essentially what sportsmanship is all about. Amazing. So, moving on from the personnel side of the athlete training environment, I want us to kind of deep dive into the actual environment itself. So the external factors and the conditions in which we're training. Alice, how important is it to you that you train with calibrated comp plates, the right kind of bar, and in an aesthetic, clean environment?
Well, it is important to me that it's clean, just because I don't want to train somewhere dirty. But to me, it is important now to use calibrated plates, because I am consistently using calibrated plates, and I do notice the difference now if I change my kit. So I was using bumpers for like the first 2 years of powerlifting, and I didn't know any different, and like that was fine. I made progress on that. And then when the gym got calibrated plates, I obviously moved over to calibrated plates, and I have now got used to that. And I think my issue is if I change my kit. So I think it's great, people who are able to powerlift in commercial gyms and they're using bumper plates and not power bars. And I've got athletes that do incredibly well in those types of environments. But we just don't change it here, there, and just chopping and changing. That's the issue. So to me, it is important, because that is what I'm used to now. Fortunately, like, I'm in a fortunate position that I have access to it all the time.
Are you not an advocate for someone doing, say, 2 days in one gym, 2 days in another? Would you prefer to have an athlete, if they have the capability, of course, just to train in one specific environment, instead of saying doing like a pure gym session Monday, Tuesday, and then going to a powerlifting specific gym Thursday, Friday?
Yeah, for sure. Especially if they're like in the lead up to a competition, they might have never touched calibrated plates before. They might be in ABPU and they need access to a deadlift bar. So I've actually got someone who's moving over to ABPU, and she's going to try and go to use a gym just for her primary deadlift day to use the deadlift bar now on her primary deadlift day to get used to it in the lead up to competition. So absolutely, yes, to split it across the 2 days, as long as it's consistent week on week on those days that she's changing.
So,
Okay, so
how far do you go to the extent of controlling your environment? Because I think I went a little bit too extreme of controlling the temperature and humidity in my gym to what the environment would be on competition day. Although on competition day, it's not going to be what I set it to. So at what point do you control your environment? And obviously the base level is using calibrated plates, using a power bar, but you don't want to go Cuba doing a touch environment.
I was just gonna wait until you finished, to be honest. But if you're sweet, the thing that I was gonna say is control what you can control on a competition day and do not control anything else. Like leave the rest of it to not be able to be controlled. So if it is, for example, like competition equipment, control that. Everything else, like your music playlist, control that. Your preparedness, your externals, control those to the best of your ability. But like outside of that, I'm very like opposite end of the scale. I'm like, whatever crowd is there is whatever crowd is there. If there's someone that annoys me or that they don't like me or that we have beef that's there, fantastic, they're there. Like it doesn't matter, and I still have to show up and perform to a high level on that day, despite what I can control and what I can't. And to a certain degree, to Ryan's point from earlier about how ego feeds into this, I would be really interested to try and flip that so that it is, I will make this move so well and stay on program. And if you push outside of program, that's on you, and I'm a better athlete for doing so. Like there's a lot of stuff that very frequently we can go very far into, like this hyper control, I have to have this, have to have that. I would almost argue that you are to the nth degree the definition of an athlete if you control less as opposed to controlling more, because athletes have to adapt. Like bench depth rule came, all had to adapt. See, all had to adapt, right? Should they ban sumo at some point? We're all going to have to adapt. Do you know what I mean? Like there are so many things where things will come up time and time again within across different federations. You're just forced to adapt now, and that is, in my opinion, uh the prime example of an athlete is someone that can adapt to any given circumstance. And I think like that's something that, as far as I am aware, would be very highly pushed in the most extreme circumstances, like the armed forces.
So this leads me really nicely onto talking about external factors that you absolutely do not have any control over, Adam. At all, sorry. Adam, if you went to Ohio, you would not be able to do anything about the air quality. So, Brandon, I'm going to throw this straight to you because I know that you have experienced this yourself, actually. What do you do in a situation where you've got external factors that you cannot control, such as being at high altitude and having really low air quality? You've also got factors such as the heat. I know the UK's recently had a heat wave. I call it a heat wave because it was warm and didn't rain for like a week. And I think we definitely all struggled with that. And they are definitely external factors that you can't control because, yeah, okay, fair enough. Your gym might have aircon, but on the way to the gym, you're definitely sweating more. You're definitely losing those salts and etc. So when you cannot control certain environmental factors, such as the altitude, how do you program or support your athletes differently? Is there anything that you have to do? Do you remove certain volume, for example? How do you help them?
Very seldom, actually, to be honest. Most of the time, like particularly with the example of high altitude where you have like lower oxygen levels, I have quite a few athletes who train in Utah. Some of them compete in Utah, other ones will actually go to different states and compete there just based off of availability of their federation. The biggest thing to look at, if there are things that are genuinely outside of your control, the biggest thing to look at is impact. So if it is, for example, a heat wave, what does this impact? It impacts probably my hydration levels. What am I going to do about that? I'm going to drink more water and have more electrolytes. Plain and simple, right? Every other thing that you cannot go, I have absolutely no control over this. This is the impact of that thing. This is now what I can do to reduce that impact. Once you've gone through that, if you are still like uncomfortable, the only two things that I could really give you would either be a straw so that you can suck it up or a ladder so that you can get over it. Anything else that's outside of your control is just kind of tough. Like, look at the impact of it, do the best you can. Oh no, it's a bit hot. Keep showing up and get the work done either way, because we're not going to like change the climate for you, right? It's entirely out of anyone's control. But the only thing that you can control is your own reaction to it. And if that reaction is, oh no, I can't really be bothered today, then someone else will be another day ahead of you. But if that reaction is, oh, now it's time to show up and work to a high standard, then you'll be a day ahead of someone else.
Love that. So, in terms of programming for your Utah athletes, you don't give them any less volume than you would anyone else.
I would honestly argue I give them more, because they stand to benefit more from doing aerobic respiration, whereas most powerlifters, like if you're in that really, really low rep range, right, you're using the phosphocreatine system first. Once that depletes, you go glycolytic. So you're drawing from your glycogen stores, which is fueled by carbohydrates. If you're all in that lower band of volume work, then you're very typically going to go straight from that phosphocreatine system into glycolytic and nothing else. But if you're doing like sixes, sevens, eights, where it's a little bit more aerobic, then the oxygen level within the altitude that you're living is actually more likely to have a genuine effect. Like, don't forget that it's only powerlifting we're doing. It would be an entirely different thing if I was like, yeah, and now for your GPP, go and run a 10K. That would be like the absolute prime example again of conditioning, of like, you're in a high altitude, so let's lean on this and get as much benefit as we can. So I'd actually argue that my programming changes to lean more to what they stand to benefit from by having less oxygen available to them, so that they can have the biological adaptation. And then whenever they do come down, they're like, oh, eights in Florida feel totally different than eights in Utah.
Amazing. So there's been a lot of research conducted about certain climates in certain areas in certain countries producing athletes of a higher caliber in certain specific sports. Jamaica, for example, has a high caliber of sprinters. Does anyone have any examples or any knowledge of any specific areas and certain conditions that have produced high quality powerlifters, for example? We often see some countries have a greater number of athletes competing internationally. Do you think that that is due to the environmental factors, the coaching, the skill level, or is it just pure coincidence that French people are really strong and also Swedish people? Just generally speaking, of course. Well, there's lots of thinking faces. I might just leave that one with you all just to consider. And we'll move on for now. Everyone's looking really confused. I think I've kind of thrown a bit of a spanner in the works. Amazing. The actual aesthetic of an environment. Do we think that matters? Ryan's nodding.
Yeah, I'll go into this one. For me, again, I would imagine everyone's seen a video or two or a picture of my garage. It's got the DBD logo on the floor. It's painted black, and the best thing that I got on there is a little whiteboard. It's the little things for me. Obviously, Alice, you mentioned about talking on being on your phone all the time in an environment like that. One thing that I do is write stuff down on the whiteboard, aims and objectives of the session. And I've also got a little note on there of a little goal for me for this time next year. Little things like that, to where I can go in, this is my workout, these are my aims, this is my one true goal. Put the phone away and I'm drawn in. Like, that's an environment I want to be in. I mentioned the brand logo, like that just encapsulates like I am part of a team. I am part of a team of like-minded athletes slash coaches, and I feel proud to be in that environment and to be representing in some way, shape, or form. I thought Callum, I thought that was Callum's assistant. So yeah, so for me, it's important. Important in the way that I can go in and I can shut off. And those are the key, the little key elements that I can just go into that environment and I can just train. Like there's no distractions.
I was going to add on top of that is I do think it's important. I think a lot of the very successful gyms and gyms that have these figures that are prominent within the certain industry, for example, if you're a gold gym, you've got all these constant reminders like show up across the gym, be it pictures or something, or a trophy or something like that where you could relate to. I think being relatable to your environment and sometimes like prompt you again of the reason you're doing it. So I think that's something to consider, because if you're training in an environment where there's no reminder, it's just like, let's just say it's all white with no like. I actually spoke to Brandon about this. I was going to make a wall with all these like motivational quotes or things that I relate to just as constant reminders. I think it's like the small things in that regard that would help motivate the athlete in times. Obviously, not going to hold motivation at a consistent level, but it's just those small little reminders.
I would argue that that should be intrinsic. No, should is an odd term, right? But I feel like a lot of that should be intrinsic. Of like, there will be times. Well, maybe there won't actually. In all fairness, but it is highly probable that at some point you will be in an environment that is not conducive to your goals, and you still have to show up and train anyway. And so a lot of that for me is like, put the power back into the athlete's hand of be like, you know why you came here, irrespective of what here is. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's why, I don't know, I very much sit like, in case it's not obvious, I very much sit on the like very intrinsic motivation, very much like adaptability, very much pushing it onto like it is the responsibility of the individual to control what is controllable, and everything else you just deal with.
I think for me, I could go into a gym very much like you said, and I could just train to the same standard as I would, albeit that the particular things that I like to have when I'm training. I'm very much a visual. Like I like to see a visual. Like, so when I go into the gym and go, oh, that's nice. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's motivation. For me, it's not motivation. I can go in and train and regardless where. It's more of a, oh, fuck. Like,
Yeah.
This is me training for that. Like, I've got the capability. It's almost just like a nice, like, oh shit, I am good enough. And then you go about your day. That's why I've got that little note there. More than essential. Yeah, supplementary more than essential. I absolutely.
Yeah, like if you're walking into like big name gyms like Alpha Lee, it's just like it just gives you that extra like elevation of the session, like the environment. It's not a necessity. Like if you're all greats within the sport can do it without all of these extrinsic things or extrinsic methods. But I think it's definitely a nice to have. Just walking into an environment is cool. Like the vibes are good. I think that's important in my own like journey as well. If for example, using a gym that I'm not at the moment or not as pleasant to be in is like the gym group, because it's very dull in there. But I think it is a pleasant reminder.
No, I agree. I think the vibes for me play more of a bigger role than it does the aesthetic. Obviously, I want something well lit, but other than that, I think the vibes play a bigger role.
I don't know. I'm thinking about this now. I've trained in loads of pure gyms and gym groups and these commercial gyms, and it doesn't affect me too much. And I'm not too, like, I think it's more a case of, I know this is going to be like, it's one of those things. The equipment's not going to be okay. It's not going to be right. The bars are going to be shit. The plate's going to be shit. But at least I get to lift. So I think on those one-off instances where I do go into these places, it's not that much of a deal. I'm not too sure what you guys think of that, or if you guys ever experienced that, but obviously if I'm traveling around handling or doing other things, I will often be in one of these types of gyms. I'm like, still got a job to do. I don't play into the aesthetic of those types of gyms. Haven't thought about it just now. It's when I go into my garage gym, it's like, no, this is mine. This feels nice. When I go into those other gyms, I'm like, doesn't affect me personally. But then again, I've trained in all sorts of kit. So as Brandon said, if an environment isn't in your control when you go into these competitions, I am so nonchalant about it. It's like, I've got to train on a whippy bar, or I've got to warm up on a whippy bar. Fuck it. It's what they got. It's what we've got to use, what everyone's got to use. Just got to get on with it.
I think if you've had the experience previously and you've worked through not necessarily perfect environments, that's built your resilience up into what it is that you train at now.
Yeah.
I trained at JD Gym before Christmas for a while, and I actually had a really pleasant experience there. I loved the aesthetic of it. I thought it looked great. I liked the lighting because actually it wasn't those like horrible neon lights that make everything look too bright. You know, it had a darker feel. It had blue LEDs. It was so over clean because chalk wasn't allowed. But so obviously there were some downsides, and there was never a bench that was good enough to actually bench press on. But in terms of the actual aesthetic, I really enjoyed it. My first gym that I trained at was one of those grisly metal gyms that's covered in dust, and everyone is super strong and wearing V-necks even in the winter, and it's, you know, there's frost on the windows, and it's really, really, you know, that rough metal old-fashioned bodybuilding gym. And from that, my gyms have only improved. So I'm very much the same. I'm not particular on what it looks like. I'm very with what has kind of been said in terms of it's all about the environment, the people, and the kind of the atmosphere in which you surround yourself with. I think that really nicely sums. Oh, sorry, go on.
I think it comes down to how deeply are you rooted to your purpose or your goal. Like if you give someone that's so rooted and has so much purpose in what they're doing, you can throw anything and they'll still do it. But if you have someone that isn't as rooted or isn't as purposeful with their goal, it's like, I'd rather just train in a nice gym. I'm not going to go to this gym just because I don't like the vibes or something like that. But I think it just comes down how deeply rooted are you to your goal and purpose.
I'm a huge advocate for that. You can't wait for the perfect time to do something, because there won't ever actually be a perfect time. And if you keep putting things off, it'll just get worse. I should have trained yesterday, but the fire alarm went off. So now it's 5 to 7 and I'm going to go and squat the evening. Is this a prime time to do it? No. Do I want to do it? Not as much as I did yesterday, but I still will, because otherwise, like, it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I just don't work. Cool. Has anyone else got anything to say? Because I think there's a really nice time for us to wrap up. Really enjoyed this chat about athlete training environment. Hopefully, when Callum rewatches it, he realizes that Ryan and Adam need their own personal gym being built at the dedicated gym. Hopefully some of our contributions will get added, obviously, into the aesthetic, because it clearly is really important. And if anyone has an answer to my previous question about certain countries having a specific external environment that builds really strong powerlifters, like Jamaica provides super fast sprinters, pop it down in the comments if you haven't already. Like, follow, and subscribe. Thanks, guys.